and welcome to this latest Levelling Up seminar. I'm Ian Dale. I'm going to be chairing the seminar over the next 45 minutes to an hour. Now, today we're going to talk about place-based levelling up. Let me introduce my panel to you. We have Justine Greening with us, former Secretary of State for Education, Transport and International Development, but not at the same time. Councillor Louise McKinley is Deputy Leader of Essex County Council. I'm an Essex boy, so we are going to get on extremely well, Louise. Nikki Pearce is with us, Academic Registrar, which sounds a very grand title, is Director of Student and Academic Services at the University of Bradford. And also with us is Anna Peachy, who is Economy Partnerships and Regeneration Manager at Plymouth City Council. Now, Justine, why don't you lead us off here and tell us what place-based levelling up actually means?
Thanks very much, Ian, for the introduction. We've got a fantastic panel representing really different parts of our country today. Bradford up in the north, obviously, Essex, part of the south, but then, of course, Plymouth as well. And the reason place-based social mobility matters is because place matters. And although we talk about this common concept of equality of opportunity and levelling up, one of the reasons it's challenging is that how you fix that in one place is very different to another place, because those communities will face different challenges. So if levelling up needs a system fix, we've got to recognise that people in different parts of our country will face very, very different challenges. So, for example, someone growing up in a very rural part of the country will probably face a whole different set of challenges on connecting up with opportunity than maybe somebody who lives where Nikki is, in the centre of Bradford. As Louise can talk about, when you look at a county like Essex, which is huge, across that county, there's a huge difference of some very different communities, even within that county, facing different challenges. So place really matters. And I think that's important to recognise, because through the Levelling Up Goals work, we've got lots of different businesses working on different parts of the Levelling Up Goals. Some are focused on digital divide, some are focused on education, some are focused on enterprise, for example, like Sage. All different interests, but actually those will play out and have different levels of importance in different places. So what we want to do is be also working with a number of these local authorities to really get a sense of how you bring that agenda together, all of those levelling up goals in one place, and how you craft those strategies that can really make a difference around the country. And what's fascinating is you have all these different local authorities challenging themselves about what they do to drive levelling up, coming up with actually quite innovative, different approaches on how they're going to do it. And so what I think the final point I want to make is, often in politics in particular, we have big rows because we have different views on things. The reality is, the interesting thing about levelling up is actually we'd expect to have different solutions. And so the fact that there's difference is a sign that probably we are heading down the right track. And the fact that we have difference is how we get the innovation to really understand what works on the ground. So far from being a problem that people are in different places on what solutions are, actually this is part of how we fix levelling up in itself. So this is a crucial piece of the work for me, and a crucial piece of the jigsaw. And the people we're going to hear from today on this panel are people who fundamentally are invested in their local communities and are really going to be at the cutting edge of how that overall issue of levelling up works on the ground, not just in another place, but in their place where they want to drive change.
Let's start off with asking each of you to talk about your own areas, your local communities, which, Louise, as Justine has just said, Essex is a massive county. And a lot of, I think, people from outside Essex imagine that it's all actually fairly rich and well-to-do. You were leader of Brentwood Council for quite some time. Now that is quite a well-to-do area, but it's typical of many areas in the country where coastal communities tend to be where the pockets of poverty are. And we all know about Jaywick near Clacton. That's sort of got a lot of headlines. One of the poorest areas actually in the whole country. Just tell us, from this levelling up point of view, what you do in Essex County Council and a bit about the county in general.
Yes, you're absolutely right, Ian. The county is so vast, and if you live in certain parts of Tendring, on average you'll live 19 years less than if you live in Uttlesford. And if you start to look at the geography of the county in terms of it being extremely rural in some parts, and other areas where it's much more about town or city focused, and obviously links into London are very different, and the opportunities that can come with that. And we've really recognised the fact that there is no one solution to levelling up within the county for all of the different reasons that have been touched on. So the approach that we've taken is to look at the wealth of data and evidence that we have, and say, who are the groups of people that actually need that additional help, support, in some cases intervention, and where are those people in terms of place as well. So very much a combination around people and place. Because if you fall into a certain socioeconomic group and you live in Brentwood, to use the example that you gave, or if you live in Tendring, then your experiences will be very different because of the place and the opportunities and everything that's around you. And what we've really identified as well is the importance of communities, and knowing that it's not just about the message and the work that we're doing, but it's actually really important who the messenger is in some of these initiatives as well. So that will look very different in different parts of the county, thinking about how we can obviously bring those communities together, recognising the importance of education, of businesses in the local area, where we can have some really good dialogue, but also some really strong examples of how people have faced the challenges that look very different, as we say, across the county, and how they've started to break some of them down. So we're thinking about what that can mean in terms of school readiness, what that means in terms of skill sets and how you can match that to jobs, the practicalities of then actually getting to those jobs. If you live in a very isolated area, how do you get to the jobs? And then thinking about that in the round in terms of raising aspiration in some of the areas, and thinking about the communities in which people will live, and understanding what that can mean for them in both in terms of challenge and solution. So thinking about it, as I say, around people and place, bringing them together and thinking about then what that looks like in terms of the role for the council, but also for our partners. This is absolutely about us all coming together. It's not just for any one group or organisation to try and tackle this.
Nikki, Bradford and Essex, two very different places, but I suspect a lot of what Louise has said there you would agree with. Tell us a bit about the challenges that you face in Bradford.
Well, yes, as you say, there are some real similarities. I mean, Bradford is a diverse county with the Bradford city centre and some real urban areas, but also some rural communities too. And it is a county with some significant inequalities. We experience health inequalities. People who live in Manningham of Bradford will live on average 10 years younger than people who live in Ilkley. Real areas of financial disadvantage, and the Social Mobility Commission found Bradford to be the second least socially mobile place in the UK when they did their study, The Long Shadow of Disadvantage. But Bradford is also a place of real opportunity. We are the youngest county. We are large, a very large population with real diversity, real ethnic diversity, rich culture, and a really entrepreneurial county. A lot of people in Bradford started their own businesses, lots of creativity and real cultural diversity. And we were one of the first opportunity areas that Justine set up when she was Secretary of State, recognising that in Bradford educational outcomes were significantly below other parts of the country, and that really needed to change. And what we've been doing in Bradford is working as kind of key organisations, so with our local council, schools and colleges, the University of Leeds as well, and NHS organisations, to really understand the specific issues in Bradford and then bring our expertise to the table. So as a university, we see ourselves as having an absolutely key role in supporting social mobility and levelling up. Education is one of the things that really can support individuals to lift them up and support their social mobility. But it's not only about educating students to develop their skills in line with the local employment needs and then go out and get great jobs. It's also about bringing our research strengths in and working in partnership with our NHS and local partners to find solutions to real Bradford problems. Everything from supporting children to be able to see properly in the classroom, right through to understanding some of the real health issues that our population face, and finding solutions that work specifically in this local region.
Anna, in Plymouth, I imagine there's lots that you've heard already that you would agree with, but Plymouth is a very, very different place to Bradford and indeed Essex, isn't it? What are the main challenges that you face?
Well, Plymouth is geographically very different. Obviously, we're in a peninsula. We don't have the benefit of surrounding counties where our businesses and people can network and commute, and that has underlying challenges for our economy. I think what we see is that some of the underlying causes and consequences of deprivation and the disparities between Plymothians and other parts of the country are often rooted in that kind of accessibility to markets, including the jobs market. But we have what we call our arc of deprivation in Plymouth, where we have some wards where deprivation is really deeply embedded, and you know, we've seen some changes over kind of 25-year programs where we've put in place infrastructure development and community economic development provision, where we've seen particularly changes to things like longevity and healthy life expectancy. So we have seen some real successes, but they have been long term, and I think particularly since 2008 we've realized that the world changed in 2008 with the economic crash, and because of our reliance on the public sector and on sectors like manufacturing, the world changed in a way that we haven't really seen recovery in our business base, in the number of kind of full-time jobs. A lot of the job creation has been part-time insecure work, for example. And there's a whole load of vicious circles around that have implications for health inequalities, poverty, deprivation, that are kind of contributed to each other, that have just meant that we haven't been able to pull ourselves out of some of the challenges that were caused back then. And we're realizing that the world has changed even more over the last 18 months, and we need to be really clever and really strategic about recognizing what the next 15 years look like, and how we put in place programs now that lead to developments over the next kind of 3, 5, 10 years that get us to a very different place in 15 years time compared to you know, what we've struggled with in the last 15 years. So this kind of levelling up program for us is very much about turning those vicious cycles into virtuous cycles, looking at the kind of skills and early years provision, and right across those levelling up goals, really, so that we're taking a multi-pronged approach, and we're not kind of investing in one area at the expense of others, because we can see from what's happened that those cycles very much contribute to each other. We're not going to be able to do this by picking and choosing which goals we need to focus on. We need a really rounded approach in Plymouth.
Justine, we've heard from our three guests about what they do on a local basis and what the challenges are. Is there an innate contradiction here between, or I don't know, contradiction, maybe a conflict between national politicians like you were when you were in cabinet, trying to implement a national levelling up policy, and of course that's what the current government says it's at the top of its priority list, and yet it's actually people on the ground who are going to pull the levers and actually implement it? Is there a conflict there at all?
I think there's a conflict almost between styles and how Whitehall has traditionally pulled levers. And I remember when I went into education, just realizing that there was no point just launching yet another national push on whatever it was, because actually, in a weird way, we should have really been asking the question why we expect all of these national policies to land in the same way in such very different places around the country. That was actually the question, in a way, that I was asking officials, is why were we surprised when things didn't work everywhere? And so the challenge we really tried to confront at the DFE was, how do you have impact when life is complex on the ground? How do you allow that difference to nevertheless still be able to be woven in? So the way we chose to trial it was through opportunity areas where there would be this national architecture, if you like, but crucially, it would be one that could be blended and tailored at a local level by local community. So you saw the approach that we had in Bradford, which ended up being very focused on early years. It ended up knitting together NHS data and local schools data. And we ended up with Bradford's brilliant Glasses for Classes project, where they improved the glasses prescriptions for kids. And funnily enough, that was a core part of how we could improve learning and literacy. But that was very different, for example, to what happened along up the road and to the east in Scarborough and the North York Coast opportunity area, where they had a massive focus on recruitment, because a bit like Plymouth, their problem was there's a lot of sea around. And whereas for most people that would be land where there were people living and you could recruit teachers from, actually, if you're by the coast, there's a big part of your surrounding area that doesn't have that sort of ability to provide you with resources for local schools that you'd have elsewhere. So different places have different challenges. And so the big challenge for government is, frankly, succeeding on the ground when what's on the ground is very different. And I guess the final point on opportunity areas is it wasn't just devolution. So my attitude was, I wanted the DFE to keep some responsibility for driving improvements, that I didn't want us to just wash our hands and say, well, it's all up to you in the opportunity areas, get on with it. Here's your small budget, make it all happen. I wanted my officials to stay responsible and to be part of those teams on the ground to drive improvements. And if we end up seeing more of that place-based approach, actually means a very different version of Whitehall, because it will be much more about being co-responsible for outcomes on the ground, being embedded into those local teams that people like Louise, for example, are leading in Essex, and Anna in Plymouth. And it will require very different skills as a result to help those projects keep going. And what you'll see is that a lot of the policy innovation happens lower down and closer to the public, and at that local authority level. And I think that is what we want to see, because that's, as we've seen with opportunity areas, where you get all of the innovation. We just need to allow these people who are closest to their local communities to have the chance to get on with what they want to try out to make a difference, but not lose sight of the fact that that national picture needs to keep on pulling it together and finding the innovation and playing a role in spreading best practice. But that is what we are also trying to do through the Levelling Up Goals work anyway.
Well, that was very interesting, because I was just going to ask about best practice. Is there a sort of central hub or something where people can go and see, well, this worked really well in Bradford, maybe it'll work where I am? Because I always think, whether it's the NHS, education, wherever, if people can learn from other parts of the country in ways that, I mean, we've got the internet now, it's easy for people to post papers and their own experiences so others can learn from them. Is that being done well enough at the moment?
I think we've got a long way to go on it. And again, one of the questions I asked at the DFE was, if some amazing teacher where Anna lives in Plymouth has genuinely this groundbreaking idea on education, whatever bit of it is, how does a teacher in Newcastle find out about it? How do we make sure it gets spread? And the answer was that we didn't have enough approaches to make sure that happened. And so what we ended up doing was creating what we called research schools through the Education Endowment Foundation. And these were schools in each of the opportunity areas that really could try out these different things we were finding out, and be test beds that then could also take responsibility for sharing that knowledge and best practice with the schools around them. So there are absolutely, Ian, ways you can do this. And I think through the Levelling Up Goals work that we're doing, what we want to do is take that framework, get the measurement, but then also start populating that best practice against those very different goals that we see companies and local authorities, NHS trusts working on the ground, and finding ways to get improvements in.
Well, just as national government tries to pull levers and relies on local government to then maybe institute the policies, I guess all three of you will be pulling your own levers and getting your local communities involved in initiatives. How easy is that to do, Anna?
Well, it's multi-layered, isn't it? So we have a number of kind of community empowerment programs, stakeholder programs. My own piece of work, for example, I'm looking at how we work not so much with business leaders, but how do we get the perspectives of individuals who are employees in our economy, and looking at the choices they make in where to work and what work to do. So very multi-layered, and making sure that we join that up in a way that is strategic and meaningful, and contributes not just to strategy, but as Justine was saying, it's that kind of policy innovation that translates from strategy to what we deliver in a face-to-face setting with our citizens in Plymouth. That's where the networking, not just across the council, but with our partners in the NHS and the university and schools, that's where that all really counts. And there's no easy way of doing that. That's about building relationships, and taking the time and the effort to consider each other's strategies and the way that we work together, and making sure that things are joined up in terms of the way that they're presented in our community buildings. So we might work closely together in the same buildings, but making sure that that delivery comes across to our citizens in a joined up way just takes hard work, doesn't it, and relationship building.
Louise, maybe give us an example from your work where you've managed to do exactly what Anna's described.
So I think the opportunities around how we can work with our communities are there for the taking, and we have some good examples where we've already started to do that. And within the council as a whole, we obviously run a variety of different services. And what I've been really keen to say to people is, we cannot continue to look at all of these in isolation. We can't be talking libraries on over here and then over here having a conversation about literacy and thinking they don't come together. And then the follow on from that around catch-ups for young children after the last couple of years, and what all that looks like, and the role that all of us can play. And where we've had some really good successes have been through our holiday camp program. So we have opened up 300,000 sessions this summer to youngsters across the county, where they can come along and have a hot meal and be able to take part in different activities. But we linked in the library service as part of that to get them out talking about books, talking about characters, and through that bringing in some of the parents from particularly in our more deprived areas. Some of them were unemployed, some of them were struggling with their mental health in terms of what they'd experienced over the last couple of years. And those parents have therefore joined some of the initiatives within the schools where we've been running these camps. They've been part of the conversations, they've been learning about what the children are doing. They've actually come on in some cases and trained up to be youth workers themselves and to be able to be part of the delivery on the ground. So, at that point, in a very, very micro fashion, we have a school where it's in a very deprived community. We've got the parents involved. We've got the school themselves involved. They were doing catch-up classes with the teachers coming in during the holidays. We're empowering the parents to actually own some of this stuff and actually get on and help us to deliver it. And they're already coming back, and they're now going to start, working with us around some of the winter camps that we're going to be doing. We're launching a winter reading challenge, and it just literally snowballs from there. So, really important that when we talk about strengthening communities, community empowerment, and all these other buzzwords, that when we actually step back and break this down, it's really important to what it is that we're trying to achieve here. It's not about any one organisation, and whether that's the state or whether it's a private organisation coming in and doing too. It has to be done together. It has to be about creating opportunities across the piece and all working together. And that's something that I think we're really starting to crack in Essex, and it's absolutely at the heart of what we're trying to achieve. So breaking down those silos within the council, thinking about all the different services that we run, thinking about our partners. I chair the Essex Partnership Board, and that's got representatives across the piece, health, education, the police. And we have so many people on there who are actually representing really strong organisations that can all be part of this. So it's about how we're sharing the message, but also putting some really clear expectations in around this. So when we're talking about opportunities for apprentices, when we're talking about Kickstart, that we're not all just agreeing and nodding that these are great ideas, that we're actually looking into ourselves and saying, well, we run huge organisations, we're part of huge organisations. What are we actually doing here that can be at the forefront of showing the way and being part of the solution? So it's not just a very interesting conversation, but that it actually translates into something that's really meaningful.
I can remember 43 years ago, a residential course that Essex County Council put on in Thaxted on politics, bizarrely. And I went on this, and without that course, I'm not sure I would be sitting here today, because it really sparked my interest in politics. I met a politician for the first time who came as a speaker, Stan Newens, who was Labour MEP for Harlow. So it's all his fault, really, that I'm doing this. So, and I think these sorts of things, they don't grab headlines, but they are really important to people that take part in them. And I remember there was, I don't know how many were on it, there was about 20. We're all staying in this sort of lovely country house in Thaxted, and they were people from all parts of the county and all social backgrounds. So the whole levelling up agenda was actually going on in a way back in March 1979, bizarrely. Nikki, when you look at the kind of activities that you've heard of Anna and Louise talk about, is that mirrored in your area?
Yes, absolutely. And I think in Bradford, kind of anchor organisations like the council, university, NHS, police work really closely together to understand the issues that we face and then find solutions, really working with the community. And there's a real community spirit in Bradford. So one example would be one of the issues we face at Bradford is a real gap in terms of skills and the skills that employers need to drive economic recovery in the region. So as a university, we are very aware that we have some unemployment and underemployment in specific groups within our graduate community. And we're running a project with our local council and a range of employers across the region to really understand why and support these really creative, people who have just graduated from our university with loads of skills into the right sorts of work. And so that is about, firstly of all, us as a university making sure that our offer is meeting the skills needs of the region, and that our graduates are prepared for the recruitment process. We're also working with those partners to ensure that all of the employers in Bradford have inclusive recruitment practices that are supportive of people coming out of university and getting jobs and value diversity. But really crucially, we're also working with local community groups to understand why there is some underemployment and unemployment and what the barriers are to young people getting jobs. So, for example, one of the groups that we have some underemployment and unemployment is Asian females. So what are the barriers to those young people getting jobs in Bradford? One of our partners is West Yorkshire Police. They recognise that their employment base, their staff base, isn't representative of the community they serve across Bradford. So they've got a big recruitment drive to try and increase the diversity, but they're working with us through our project to speak to community groups to understand why policing isn't an attractive career within those groups, and how they can overcome those barriers to make sure that it is seen in a positive way and the real opportunities that that career could offer somebody. And I think our communities in Bradford are all, we've got such diversity, it's really important that we do listen to them, but they're all really willing. Within our university, we always say whenever we're taking a new idea or a new initiative forward, never without a student, we always co-create with our students. And I think in Bradford, you've got that replicated with the community. So we don't do things in isolation as a university or the council or other organisations. They're always done with our community, because it's so important we understand what is important and the values of that community and how we can bring them along with us on that journey.
Just tell us a little bit more about the Bradford Opportunity Area, which I guess is levelling up in action. What worked and what didn't?
I think the partnership that's been developed across that opportunity area really has worked. It's really brought together organisations without the hierarchies that you sometimes get when national organisations are trying to work locally. Everyone's been around the table with their own expertise and their own skills, just trying to make a difference. So I think that firstly, that removal of hierarchy really has worked. And then I think there's been a true sense of really listening to the schools and the colleges within the Bradford region and understanding what they face and the issues that they are experiencing. So the Glasses for Classes project that Justine was talking about really came out of, you know, intelligence on the ground from schools being married up then with NHS data to identify an issue and find a solution that was really about improving the prescription of glasses for children. But that came out of listening and really understanding what was happening. Over COVID, you know, we've seen inequalities exacerbated. There was already underperformance of at GCSE level in young people in Bradford, and then with COVID, the local authority was listening to schools and really seeing that gap getting worse. So we were able to put in place a tutoring programme where students from our university and recent graduates have gone in and provided extra support on maths to young people. And not only are they supporting the math skills of those young people, but they're also really crucially really important role models because they've come from the communities where these young people are in schools. And they're able to demonstrate, yeah, you can go to university and this is great. And here I am to help you develop your math skills and help you get the best possible GCSEs. So I think the opportunity area has really developed that partnership and that listening across sector to find, you know, in some cases quite small interventions, but that have really big impact.
Justine, you've been on a visit to Bradford recently. What did you learn there that maybe is applicable to Essex and Plymouth?
Well, I think interestingly, the tutoring programme is very applicable probably to Essex. You know, there's a fantastic university and it was a classic. So there was that because it's a win-win. The students developing their own skills and also got training to become tutors. So they weren't just sort of thrown into this without training. They literally may end up, some of them going into teaching quite possibly. So it's this sense of a community finding its own solutions. The graduate workforce Bradford programme, you know, is this classic social mobility solution where you have this fantastic place, Bradford, with tons of talent. You've got a university that genuinely has worked out how to allow a whole wider diversity of the people who live in the city access getting to higher education. So the next step is, fine, we've got higher skills, how do we connect it up? And that's what the Graduate Workforce Bradford programme is. So you could start to see the opportunity area really continuing to develop. Whereas at the beginning, it was focused on almost schools and early years and that core literacy and numeracy piece. Actually, it was getting ahead of the curve to think, well, as these young people move through the education system, we need to make sure there's the employment pipeline then for them to connect up with opportunities, but then the university really stepping into that space with others to make it happen. So it's this whole system approach that works. And I just wanted to pick up on also what Anna said. Yeah, it's a lot of hard work. And I think the challenge for Whitehall is and I've been a cabinet minister for lots of years, is it would be wonderful if there was that big totemic policy you could announce and that would just fix everything. Life would be fab if we could tackle things so straightforwardly, but the reality isn't. It's complicated. It's a lot of hard work. It requires people who are really good at partnership working in a political world often where the debate itself and if you like, the division has become ever more hard to get over. And so, you know, this isn't rocket science in a way. It's just a lot of hard work on the ground, but informed by what works and some innovation by people who really care and are able and have the skills and the ability and the desire to get beyond into those other partnerships and make them work. And it doesn't necessarily feel that earth-shattering when you say it like that. But you know what? It hasn't happened because if it had happened, we'd have had a much more leveled up country faster. So listening to these people we've got on the panel, Louise, Nikki and Anna, actually those are where the solutions are. And that's why we need to do more of this local push on levelling up. But that is also, to be fair, I think, to government, where I think government's increasingly going.
Okay. Louise, how do you see local authority stakeholders getting involved with levelling up, both internally and through the services that they deliver?
I think that's a really good question, Ian, and with a very long answer if we had the time. In terms of what we're doing in Essex, we have our own programme which we are proceeding with. We're allocating funding for it as part of the Everyone's Essex plan. And I think there's a real opportunity here to link in with government, of course. If you've got national and local government with the same intended outcomes, then that's obviously should be welcomed. And I think we need to think about how we can link that up much more, particularly around things like the skills agenda, where it should be done nationally. You'll get much better outcomes if there is that local delivery. But I think for local authorities, it's really facing off into the two directions. Absolutely having that conversation with national government and thinking about what can be done there, but equally getting on and recognising what it is that we can do here and now in our own areas. And I touched on earlier about some of the work that we've done with our holiday camps, our libraries, and the partnerships and the arrangements and the relationships that we have across the piece within the county. And that they are so important at helping us to deliver what it is that we want to. So certainly from Essex perspective, in the new year, we're going to be launching the programme. We'll be very much focusing initially on the cohorts, the groups of people where we'll be targeting, who we'll be targeting. And then that will follow a couple of weeks later with the first launch in a place where we'll be recognising what it is that is specific to that place that we can therefore start to work with and start to address. So it is about those relationships. It is about thinking about the services. Much of this is already in our gift to start doing. I think, sometimes as much as the answer is very complex, we can equally overcomplicate some of these conversations. And I think if we start to break it down and think about some of the, the really small example that I gave you earlier about those, those young children whose mums are coming in, the mums have got the qualification, they're now in some paid employment, just having those discussions with people after they've been through that and just seeing how, literally on their faces, how their life has changed. It's really empowering to the whole movement in terms of what we're trying to achieve here. And I think if we start to break it down and think about what that can mean to different groups of people in different communities right the way across the county, and think about it as as the Lego set, the building blocks for what you hope will be a much bigger outcome in terms of moving the dial, much of which will be generational. And let's be clear on this, it's not all going to happen next week or next month, but to start small and just think about what it is that as a local authority we are in control of and we can start to do straight away. And that's where the libraries for me, that they come into it in terms of thinking about how we can broaden that out. How do we increase people coming into the libraries? What does that mean in terms of us taking the libraries to these communities, thinking about some of the literacy, thinking about how we can get youngsters and crucially their parents. We need people to be able to support their children through literacy. And they need the skills themselves for that. Thinking about what that means to help youngsters be school ready, sitting down on the carpet, hearing a story, socializing, all the things which so many of us take for granted. But if you haven't had that opportunity and you haven't grown up in that environment and you haven't had that as a parent, then how do you pass that on? You know, these are very difficult conversations for many families. But I think it's about understanding what it is that we as the local authority can start to do, but then equally thinking about the bigger piece, the more strategic direction that we can go in terms of some of those conversations with partners. You know, we know that through some of our Active Essex work, where we've been, you know, really trying to drive forward the need to be active, whether that's through sport, whether it's walking to the shops, gardening, whatever it may look like for you, the implications that can have on people's health, their well-being. These are all interrelated issues that we're talking about here, and being able to reach out and target some of that intervention, some of that support in some of those communities where we know that obesity is an issue, for us to be able to take our force, our might, but also that of our partners, and start to make some of these changes. Ultimately, life tells us success breeds success. If you start with these small things, it will snowball. But I think it's about breaking it down and understanding what small steps we can take now and the difference that can have.
Anna, same question to you. How do you see local authority stakeholders getting involved? And is it a bit like herding cats? Because there must be so many different people, so many different organisations getting involved, both in the private and public sector. How do you coordinate everything?
I suppose going back to what I said earlier and that Justine picked up on, that I mean, you know, herding cats kind of makes it sound like it's impossible, when in actual fact it is possible. It's hard work, and you just have to accept that it's something that you keep working at. You keep building those relationships. You keep kind of reinventing those relationships. So we make sure, for example, that we've got crossover between different committees, different teams, you know, where we're going out through kind of community settings, where we work in partnership with community organisations, that those things happen in different ways. It's a matrix management process, isn't it? So I think it can look a little chaotic and perhaps like herding cats, but in actual fact, that's the way that it needs to work. There needs to be a lot of crossover, a lot of dipping in, a lot of maintaining relationships at different levels. You know, some of those relationships are kind of one-to-one and on a really frequent basis. Some of those relationships happen much more in a one-to-many setting, and perhaps a less frequent basis, but you might touch in with people in between. And you know, that's the way that we break down silos. It's the way that we break down the kind of tiers of governance, isn't it? Whether it's working with national government, community organisations, through the members of the council, the politicians, across officer networks, across public sector partners, with our big employers, with our chambers of commerce, with our kind of training providers, our skills settings. You know, all of those relationships require that level of semi-organized matrix management, and I think bringing that together into a strategy is very difficult, because it is ever changing. The timescales change, the priorities change. Going back to what Justine said about that kind of policy entrepreneurship, that requires us to be very fleet of foot around these things. So yeah, I prefer to talk about matrix management than herding cats, but perhaps kind of
just thinking, does an ordinary
a
person understand the phrase matrix management? If you just said that to me off the cuff, I wouldn't have a clue what you meant by that.
Well, yeah, I suppose so. So managing relationships in a network. So recognizing that we need to reach out to people in lots of different audiences at different levels of power, different sizes of stakeholders. So whether it's citizens or politicians, officers in the council, in our kind of NHS, all of those kinds of different settings require relationships, and making sure that we're aligning to at least some extent in the way that we are saying to people, we want to be inclusive in the way that we employ you, the way that we engage you in services, the way that we promote opportunities for you. That just requires an ongoing day-to-day reflection on what's working, what isn't, how can we change.
Right, final question to all three of you, and then I'll come back to Justine to maybe sum up. If you look at all of the different levelling up goals, which one do you think is the most important for your area? I mean, we've talked on these seminars over the past few months about obviously health inequalities, education, skills, all sorts of different things. Which is the one that you feel is most important in your area? Let's start off with you, Nikki, in Bradford.
Well, perhaps unsurprisingly, I think I'm going to focus on education, because I think education is the thing that has the most power to disrupt someone's life trajectory for the positive. And I think if we get education right in primary and secondary, and then get people progressing through either to higher education or vocational further education, then that will enable them not only to develop the skills to change their own lives and their families' lives, but then they're contributing to the regional economic development that enables other people to benefit from their growth.
Louise?
I think I'd have to say the strong foundation and early years. There's so much data that's around this now, around starting well in life, the impact that can have, particularly in the 0 to 2 years, around children's well-being and their ability to start school in the best place, and then right the way through to GCSE results or whatever they do after that in terms of educational outcomes, which ultimately, if you see education as the way out for many families, which I certainly put a very strong emphasis on the importance and the opportunities that education can bring, then if you don't start well, it's just made all the harder as you progress. So that would be my top one.
Anna?
Really difficult to pick one, and I think I'm going to completely dip out and say that we can see.
Come on, I got 2 out of 3. I want an answer.
Because of the research that we've done that's showing these vicious cycles, I can see that actually they all interlink and they contribute to each other. So early years is a kind of really important cause and consequence of inequality in Plymouth. But what we see is that that requires us to have the people in jobs who are kind of using early years settings, making sure they're invested in. We've got kind of workplaces where people with caring responsibilities are able to manage work alongside their caring responsibilities. We need to make sure that people with health challenges are able to manage those alongside caring responsibilities and work. These things interlink. You can't just say that in Plymouth, if we kind of make the early years settings perform better, everything else will fit into place, because we can see that making everything else fit into place will make sure that the early years settings work better. So like I say, vicious cycles need to turn into virtuous cycles. So I'm going to say all 17 goals. 14 goals. Just all 14 goals are just as important.
I'm sure we could invent 3 more. Justine, do you want to sum up the last hour for us, and where do you think that we can go in this particular area of place-based levelling up?
I think first of all, it tells us that a lot of the innovation and the solutions are going to be trialed out by local authorities and communities around the country. And actually we need, through this levelling up goals work, to find those models that are driving change. That's the first thing, because they will come out of this big piece of work, I think. I think the second point is almost this herding cats point, which is what was fascinating during COVID was there wasn't the time to set up loads of structures of how people were going to work together. And that normally in politics takes years. And then we spend years on a strategy. Actually, what was fascinating about COVID was because the mission of what we were trying to do was so obvious to everyone, it alone really was enough to get everybody broadly aligned. And so I think the other thing that comes out of the discussion is partnership works, but we shouldn't stand on ceremony having perfect roles for everyone, because there will be a bit of overlap, as Anna pointed out, and Nikki, that in a way that's good, because we kind of want that cross-fertilization and ownership of issues to happen. And so, yeah, partnership matters. But the thing that actually keeps the shape of what people are working on together is the fact that there's this common goal of levelling up. And when everybody knows what they're actually trying to achieve, whether it's tackling COVID or whether it's levelling up, broadly, people will get organised themselves. And I think that was also the lesson of the opportunity areas. I didn't need to tell them what priorities they had, because I knew that if you got the right people around the table with the same common mission, they would sort it out for themselves. And that's exactly what they ended up getting on with. So yeah, lots of lessons that come out of this. Maybe final reflection for me is, in a sense, the more that you can have individual parts of the system working out what their levelling up jigsaw pieces, whether it's the NHS, whether it's a local authority that's convening a lot of this, whether it's the businesses that are there at the local level thinking, right, where do we fit in? The more people are coming to that discussion about how they work together at a local level with an informed perspective of already where they think they can contribute. And I think that, and when you get those jigsaw pieces already developed and done, whether it's Bradford University or whether it's Centric or whoever, I think that's when you really start to get some traction, because you have local authorities then better able to do what they want to do, which is to convene and galvanise and steer and orchestrate those locally tailored priorities that they have the insight in.
Justine, thank you very much, and thanks to Louise McKinley, Nikki Pearce and Anna Peachy for taking part in this Levelling Up webinar. If you've missed out on all of the others that we've done, you can find them on the Levelling Up Goals website. Join us again next time. Goodbye.